I guess we're live now.
I think we're live, Kev.
I think we are too. Live on YouTube because LinkedIn is down. But I see our images there on YouTube. So I'm going to just assume that we're live here for episode 8 or 7 of What's the Bid? We're talking about the freight markets and everything involved in that, which includes a lot of the economy. So we're going to talk about the economy today. Casey, aren't we? Casey, my co-host over here at Farelanes.
Yeah.
And our special guest, Anthony Smith, the freight economist, the FreightWaves Now star, the Freightonomics star.
Biggest smile in freight.
I know, the $1 million smile right there. We have it. Anthony, it is great to catch up with you again.
Awesome. Well, guys, thanks so much for having me. It's amazing to catch up again. It's been far too long to get the gang back together, and I'm excited to always talk about some macroeconomic trends, of course, what it means for the U.S., what it might mean for me, you, and of course, what it might mean for the freight environment. But yeah, I'm excited.
Good. So let's start talking about rates here.
Sure.
Rates. What are you seeing in rates, Casey?
That is the question of the day, right? It's been the question of the day for what feels like a couple of years now. I don't know. Where do we want to start? We want to talk more broadly. We want to dive into any markets. Happy to take it wherever you guys would like to. Tony, what are you seeing from a macroeconomic perspective these days?
It's a strange time in the macroeconomy. You know, when you're looking at, of course, the employment situation has been, I think, the driving force behind a lot of what we're seeing in the overall economy. So consumers feeling empowered with the current job market, even though we might see a little bit more increases in delinquency rates, slowing down-ish in some consumer spending, but nonetheless, consumers are still propping up the overall economy as of now. It's also going to be interesting looking at the upstream, so looking at manufacturing, which has kind of been a bit of a laggard when you're looking at some of the macroeconomic indicators. We did see a little bit of a tick up in industrial production. The ISM PMI still showing some signs of easing, especially when looking at new orders and backlogs. So it's definitely in a strange time. The thing is that the labor market is supporting ongoing purchases. And of course, Americans love things to just be easy. So we continue to see the prevalence of those buy now, pay later, or pay over time. So even if you are a cash-strapped American, there are ways around it to continue to make some of those purchases. But I'm not one to say that, hey, you know what? It's all cash, because, you know, we're seeing all these different types of ways to make purchases a lot easier, not just from the buy now, pay later, but contactless. You're also seeing trends in the opposite side. I don't think it's made a huge dent just yet. I'm not a TikTok guy. I'm not on TikTok at all, but I've heard about this viral trend of the no spend challenge. Shout out to Reed Clements. As you all know, we used to have like these challenges on a weekly basis of like, hey, I bet I can spend less money than you. And it was like $100 weekly challenges and things like that. So that's starting to take on to be cool of not spending money. So we'll see if that kind of takes wind and really kind of fuels any kind of significant trends in the macroeconomy. But right now, it's definitely a strange time. Consumers are still making purchases. I think before we see a full fall off in consumer activity, we'll likely start to see folks trade down in the quality of goods. Maybe they're not buying the most premium thing. Maybe they're trading down in services as well. But one of the big things is what's happening in the labor market. We're seeing that a lot of folks are hoarding labor. So instead of like these mass layoffs or anything like that, I think a lot of companies are in this holding pattern of let's just wait and see what happens. We still have just over 8 million job openings, about 1 million over pre-pandemic levels. But then there's a lot of speculation right now of multi-counting. You see some LinkedIn job postings of, you know, one position in 10 cities, but it's just one role. Is it counted 10 times? Or you see some folks that might post a role, and if it's really a priority, why has it been up for the last 3 months? Are you really hiring? Are you building out a pipeline of talent?
Mhm.
So there's all these different trends happening on the labor side that can make that a little bit more, I would say, fuzzy around the edges. But definitely a strange time of the economy. But we are still pumping forward despite ongoing, I would
Yeah.
say, inflation, even though it's been easing, but it's still very much a factor in day-to-day
Well, yeah.
life,
It's
especially when
interesting.
you're looking at overall trends.
Right. Like, I mean, CPI, to me anyways, seems like it can be a little bit misleading. I saw a tweet this morning. Some guy hadn't ordered Walmart plus delivery in 4 or 5 years. I think his previous order was like $117, and then he hit order again today. It's like a $410 delivery, right? Free delivery, $410 worth of groceries. So, costs do seem to be going up. And maybe, you know, the question there, I guess I'm thinking about as well. You talked about manufacturing. As manufacturing moves, to more of a nearshoring model, maybe it's coming to the Americas or whatnot. How do the indicators, right, or the metrics we use to track manufacturing adapt to that? Is there any lag there? Be interesting to know
Definitely.
about that
Yeah, I
methodology.
think that's a big one. So I think it's a great point. We're looking at North America. Of course, in the US, we have some manufacturing going on here for sure. A lot of it's going to be on that higher end of the curve of technology. So when you're looking at what is manufactured domestically here, it's going to be some more of those high tech goods for sure. But really, it can't compete right now with what's going on in China. And so there's just been an entire infrastructure that's been built out, specialized for North American consumption and really global consumption. So it's going to take some time for that nearshoring aspect to really take hold. But when we do see that take hold, I think we're going to start to see that a shortening in the overall length of production times. We're looking at Mexico being more of a partner or more of a player within manufacturing. So I think we'll definitely start to see more activity there. But of course, things kind of get a little bit strange during these election years. And so this is an election year. I think we even have our first debate, I think tonight,
Nice.
maybe, already happening. So things get strange during election years. Sometimes it's just like, even at the Capitol, at the manufacturing level, it's just like, you know what, let's wait and see what we have in office,
Right.
even though a lot of times it's not going to make a huge change, until like maybe 3, 4 years later. A lot of folks are going to start to wait and see what those implications might be or what they feel like they might be before they make these big capital goods orders or purchases and move forward with things like that. So that's also going to be a big factor to kind of see how that plays out.
The election year. Going back to employment, right? And you're talking about the job boards and one position posted in multiple cities that may or may not really be necessary. Maybe it's just a little bit of fishing out
Mhm.
there to collect candidates. Really reminds me of load boards and how it's been a practice of some to post the same load in multiple cities around that geographic area, and sometimes it's not really even a load, you're just trying to get quotes. So it really reminds me of that, along with the job board.
Oh,
um,
and Kevin, also, I know the broker strategy is also being able to build out a list of contacts. Now you
mhm,
have a carrier that runs this lane. Now you have a carrier that has no problem going to LA or no problem going to, some parts of LA.
yeah.
It's just you build out that network and now you have someone that you can kind of call and go to. And that's all I think a part of the game with the broker strategy sometimes. And also a lot of these employers are going to want to say, hey, you know what? We have some churn. Someone just left, but we have 5 candidates that's been on the bench right now for the last 3 months, and we're good to go.
So unemployment, what's unemployment? It's still sub 4%,
I think it's right at 4%.
right at
We're looking at
4%.
unemployment, so still going strong. Like I said, it's strange because you do have this instance of a lot of employees or employers holding on to talent that they may have, in other times gotten rid of. But you have to think about some of the aspects of, you get rid of an employee. Sometimes these companies are still fresh minded from the pandemic and understand the great resignation, the pain that went through of hiring and training and how expensive that was. And so sometimes they don't want to go through that whole process again. And also, when they're holding on to all this talent, you have to really kind of cover your overhead costs because it's expensive to just hoard talent.
Yeah.
And so that comes into when Casey was mentioning some of those inflationary pressures when you're looking at, okay, now I'm holding on to talent. I got to get this money somewhere. Let's increase prices here. And so that's also going to play a factor into what we're seeing in the overall employment landscape. And then, of course, Jerome Powell has a difficult job of trying to land this plane on a narrow strip and, not cause a significant recession by overshooting, but also not undoing the progress by having rates come down too quickly or too much. And so that's a difficult position to be in right now.
So we're still in the air. We haven't landed, right? I
Haven't
mean,
landed
because you hear about soft landings and hard landings for years now, it seems like. So we're still in the air. Are we in a holding pattern, or are we descending? Are we just right around the runway, or are we still in transit at 30,000 feet?
So I think that's going to be perspective. So when you're thinking about like what Casey was mentioning, especially with grocery orders and things like that, food, I think that's going to be one of the sticky things, and one of the things that people are going to have to. It's an essential thing. So it's going to be something that people are going to be looking at when you're looking at the rate of inflation. And you start thinking about, oh, it's only up, 3% over the last 12 months. But when you start looking at over the last 3 years, it's a constant, steady rise of double-digit increases over that time frame. And so even though we're getting closer and closer to that benchmark level or the goal of 2%, we're not there yet. And so staying true to his word, as he mentioned, what we're taking it, instance by instance, taking in all the data, we're definitely seeing that he is staying true to, trusting the data and staying hard on inflation for the time being. And so we're still in the air. I think it's starting to ease a little bit. I think if we're in a plane right now, I don't know if the pilot has announced that, return to your seats. We're now starting to our descent just yet, because interest rates are still up and have not yet begun its downward movement. I think there might be maybe one, potentially two declines in interest rates, maybe at the tail end of the year. And so I think even after that, the descent is going to be one of those annoying ones when the pilot announces, hey, we're going to start our descent. And it's going to be like maybe a 2-hour descent, instead of like the 15-minute, like, hey, we're touching the landing strip. It's going to be, all right, I thought you announced that we're on our way down, and that was an hour and a half ago, and I see we're still in the air. So it's going to be one of those things that we might be higher for longer, of course, without any types of sudden black swan events or anything like that might happen to spur sudden cuts in interest rates for any reason.
It's always interesting when we talk about 2%, 3%, or I think of the high, it was around 7 or 8% on an annualized basis each month, right? But the rule of 72, you have to think about the rule of 70, right? The rule of 72, Anthony. Can you explain the rule of 72 and just kind of the impacts that have on percentages that don't seem outrageous? 2%, 3%, 7% hurts, right? But it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of gives you, there's a few ways to go about it. I think one of the ones is like the number of years required to double your money, I believe.
Yeah. So like at 10%, it takes about 7 years.
Yeah,
right?
and then
Double your money, right? So
yeah,
if you're talking about 7% inflation, you're talking about 10 years or so, maybe 12 years, right? Of doubling in prices, like completely doubling, which is pretty significant. when
It
it comes
is,
down to
and
it.
it adds up over time. It
Yeah.
compounds, and I think that's when we start to see, these small pockets pop up of no saving challenge on TikTok or Reddit groups and things like that. And you start to see, financial institutions really making it easier for consumers because I think in the US, we love things to just be easy and simple. I dislike how easy it is for me to buy so quickly on Amazon. When you just hit the buy now button, it's just like, all right, it's on its way, it's done, it's going to be here. Contactless payment, as I mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, just tap your watch, tap your card, tap your phone, whatever it might be. Maybe even your ring now. I think that's a thing as well. So it's just so many ways of making it easier. And the unfortunate thing is when we're looking at a potential overextension for some individuals, when we're looking at financially, when we're looking at delinquency rates, that's going to be a thing to watch because if we do see that there's a shakeup, now you're exposed to record levels of debt if there is some kind of disturbance in the labor market.
And that is another question I had for you that I had written down, right? My trusty little notebook here is American consumer and debt. Where are we? Because I remember we talked about debt all the time in the office. We talked about it on air quite a bit, and it's something we both had an interest in. I think everyone should because that controls spending. Right? There's much more
Right.
debt out there than there is cash.
There's a guy, Thomas Massey, in Congress, congressman from Kentucky.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty sure he's not a senator, but he wears a badge, or I guess like a lapel pin that's a computerized debt calculator. And if you look at his collar, right, the thing's going up $50,000 a second, I think.
Yeah. I mean, well over that 1 trillion mark, I think we're looking at revolving credit overall. And it gets concerning because it's at record highs, and it's also not even getting into the national debt. That's a whole nother, bag of marbles in its own because that's not sustainable. And when we're looking at the American consumer, there are ways that have been made to make their debt more comfortable to hold. Just as it kind of crept up to make student loan debt more comfortable and acceptable. When you hear about, oh, you have $20,000 in student loan debt, and then you might hear someone say, oh, that's not that bad. And then, someone's like, maybe 30, 40 years ago, someone says that, now you're like kind of like, what? I can't believe it. But now that's such a normalized thing. The other big thing is I always say, even though we are seeing record levels of debt, even though we're seeing consumers continue to spend overall, even though we have seen some easing, is to never bet against the American consumer. We just got Amazon Prime Day announced not too long ago, coming up here in July. And we've seen other major retailers already start to slash their prices. I think Target's been one of them to kind of drive up more volume. And so, of course, when Amazon Prime Day comes, all the other retailers are going to start really kind of piling on as well. So thinking Best Buy, Target, all the other retailers that are going to try to get in on the e-commerce holiday, Christmas in July here. That's going to be one where we kind of see a lot of consumers start to get tested on what they're going to be willing to buy, what kind of deals are going to really truly be deals. Because I think we've probably seen times in the past where there were these e-commerce holidays that were maybe not the best deals that people really kind of were expecting, or really sometimes where they would go on a little bit longer. Of course, remember last holiday season when Black Friday turned into really Black November throughout the entire month. And it started as early as, October. Halloween hasn't even happened yet, but you start to see some, Black Friday like deals going into, the latter half of October. So it's definitely going to be a lot more interesting, I think, on the consumer side. But I think similarly, or maybe on the other side within the freight markets, I think we might start to see a little bit of a return to seasonality. I know that's been a thing that's been thrown out of whack for quite some time. I know right after the pandemic, it was just like, hey, you know what? Throw seasonality out the window. produce season is going to be, this time frame now, and it's going to have this impact. I think now we're going to start to see a little bit more pronounced or a little bit more definition around some instances of seasonality, even if we haven't seen, enough capacity come off the roads just yet to make a huge difference to get rates back to where they were pre-pandemic.
Yeah, Kevin, that's something we've been hearing a good bit about,
Mhm.
right? Is the market going to re-normalize to kind of pre-pandemic type of freight market? I don't know. I mean, what are you hearing on the brokerage floors these days, Kev?
Yeah, I think we're getting closer and closer to normalization, right? A resetting back to, say, 2019. We're not a hot freight market. It was kind of the doldrums. We thought it was a bad market until we saw, the last couple of years, and that's a bad freight market. But yeah, one with economic activity that's pretty normal, right? There's no recession happening. It's very normal, but you had this big influx of capacity and a surge in demand that went away, left this overhang of capacity out there. So very normal economic times, but just too much capacity in the market. The delta between contract rates and spot rates are still really high. So you have all the contract loads are still being tendered and taken, accepted. You don't really have this big rejection rate. So that's kind of what we're in right now. Certainly, in 2019, 5 or 6% outbound tender rejections was about normal. And that sunk down to 2 or 3% in this cycle, right? We're getting back up to that 5% mark, right? Where it is not a horrible freight market. It's not a good freight market. It is a blah freight market. So just getting back to that, getting back to seasonal patterns is good for everybody. Because you can't make the jump to any kind of tightness in the market until you get back to that point, I think. And hopefully we see that. I think that the future looks better as interest rates come down, right? And where they're going to come down to is the key, because I don't see them coming back down to zero. Hopefully they don't come back down to zero, because that's not good either. Hopefully, what are they at right now, Anthony? What's the benchmark rate?
For the goal for interest rates?
Yeah, or what's the Fed have it set at right now?
Oh, okay. So the today's current interest rates are going to be, I think the 20-year fix is at 6.8, 6.75, 6.8. I think that's the current 20-year. So it's
Okay.
definitely something that have seen. I think that rise has been something that a lot of folks have anticipated was going to be, this isn't going to be something that's going to be, here for a long time. I know when we look back to 2023, there was this expectation that, this is going to be coming down maybe 4, maybe even 5 declines in some of the more aggressive estimates from some outlets and economists, that we would see a bigger cut by now. But it's been elevated. Let me see.
It has. So if we come
FOMC.
down 2 points, let's say, right? If the 20-year comes down to from 6.8 to 4.8, right? I mean that's a good Goldilocks kind of number, right? It's not too high, it's not too low. Should it spur some economic activity and some investment? Because going back down to 2 or 3%, I think is unnaturally low, and I don't know how much that really helps.
Well,
I'm sorry, I think it was 5.5, 5.2 to 5.5.
5.2 to 5.5. So we come. Go ahead, Casey. Sorry.
down. Are we officially coming down? That's wonderful. I mean, it's interesting. I think I remember seeing this week, Morgan Stanley made a call that we'll see, spot rates, I think, jump $1 a mile by sometime in 2025.
Yep.
and then you see, this genius over at XPO, RXO, GXO, Brad Jacobs make the acquisition of Coyote. Like, is this that classic time in a down cycle where the people with the cash and the capital can get a little bit ahead of the curve before the market can react and make some of those purchases, acquisitions, things like that really put them in a spot to, catch most of the upswing that's inevitably coming, right? We can't stay in the troughs forever.
Yeah, RXO bought Coyote earlier this week, just over $1 billion, right? That was a huge deal
multiple too, right? Pretty serious multiple too, right?
Pretty serious multiple, yeah. Pretty serious multiple. I think Coyote came in last year at somewhere just under $4 billion in gross revenue, so kind of makes sense. UPS buying Coyote back in the day, did it really make sense? But I was looking yesterday, and UPS market cap is $115 billion. So it's kind of like us going out and buying a new pair of shoes and not really liking them, I suppose, right? No big deal. It's not going to bust you, right? But I don't know RXO's gross revenue numbers. It's certainly over $1 billion, maybe over $2 billion. So it basically doubles their size. Let's just say. Rough math. It doubles their size in a down market, right? Where they got Coyote for a really good price. And now they have doubled their size overnight, right? And I think RXO and Jacobs have certainly they have the track record of integrations and putting companies together. So it's a great buy for them. Great strategic buy. But yeah, I think we're at that cycle where you see more M&A deals going through because it's you want to buy things when they're on sale, and in down markets everything's on sale, so you go out and you buy.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see after the first cuts interest rates what the reaction will be from consumers, what the reaction will be from businesses. Will that just open the floodgates potentially? Or would folks start to say, hey, here's the first one. I'm going to wait until they come down just a little bit more before I start making some of these capital expenditures. We're already starting to see, I think, some trimming and stepping down in certain goods. So, for example, housing and construction is going to be a big one, where interest rates have really kind of impacted the overall housing and construction market. I think builders are definitely going to be looking at kind of maybe downgrading some finishes and some, maybe countertops are going to be a little bit of a downgrade because that's going to make the home a little bit more affordable. Maybe you don't have to have these premium finishes in order to move some of these homes and continue to sell or try to sell. So I think once we start to see that downward movement in interest rates, it's definitely going to be something to watch. It's going to be the housing market. And of course, I think the auto market as well, because that's been a strange one. We saw the pandemic, the shortages of parts. Now you don't have the components to, finish the vehicle. Now a vehicle's sitting there partially complete and you're waiting for maybe like a seat belt clip to come off the port of LA to complete the vehicles to get these fleets out. And so now there's been a recovery from that, but I think we still see, some shifts from that, where now maybe some vehicle and auto manufacturers are shifting into increasing prices on vehicles instead of trying to move as many vehicles as possible. And so I think that's going to be a big one. Consumers on their purchasing habits on furnitures, electronics, things like that to fill up a new home or apartment that they move into. So that's definitely going to be, I think, one of the things to watch is how consumers and businesses react after we see the first interest rate cut, whenever it does happen.
And you can't really do a show with Anthony Smith without him talking about lumber and housing. The cornerstones of research here. We have Anthony Smith, the Frey economist, on Dude, What's the Bid? presented by Farelanes and Brush Pass Research. I'm Kevin Hill, Casey Larkin here as we go into the second half of the show. And transport topics, right? Let's get some hard figures on the RXO Coyote deal. RXO in the last, here we go, they're number 8 at just under $3 billion in gross revenue. Coyote was number 3 at $5.2 billion. You add those together and you are at about $8.1 billion, which is just south of Total Quality Logistics, TQL. So you have C.H. Robinson at $15.8 billion, TQL at $8.7 billion, and now number 3, you have RXO at right around $8 billion, and then Worldwide Express, who bumped up there because of their acquisition of Global Trans a couple years ago. So you're seeing those large players, those large brokerages consolidating a bit over the years.
Yeah, for sure. Be interesting to see if I guess right, you only got to double 8 billion to get to 15 or 16, right?
Exactly right. Just go out and buy a couple more companies, I suppose. But that becomes problematic as well.
True.
You get a lot of overlapping customers.
Right.
I'm also curious to see how, of course, I think some of the bigger players aren't going to be, I think, strapped for cash as we continue to see how this market plays out in 2024. The other area that I'm really intrigued by is of course, smaller players, where I think we're starting to see, of course, the erosion for some of the smaller and mid-sized operations. Those stories pop up, a couple times a week or per month. But the owner operators seem to also be, I think, kind of coasting for the most part, especially those experienced owner operators. This isn't their first rodeo. They can make their way, through a rough patch. So I think we haven't really seen a lot of owner operators really kind of, pull the plug just yet. It would be awesome to see like some type of years of experience owner operators or drivers that are in the market right now, and how they're faring compared to those that have been, through 5 years of these types of cycles. So, but I think the experienced owner operators are definitely still chugging along. And anecdotal, stories. My cousin, shout out Chris Bryant, out there. What up, Chris? He's my cousin's the owner operator, and he's still active. He's still making it, happen. And of course, it's probably not like how it was, throughout the midst of the pandemic, where you can just kind of fall into anything and just kind of make crazy margins that have never been seen. But he's still doing well, doing just fine. And I think that's going to be the story for a lot of experienced owner operators. It's not amazing, but they're still continuing to find a way to make it through this market and through the cycle, despite the overwhelming capacity that's still on the roads right now.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, we need some kind of economic event to really spurn the freight markets again. Usually it doesn't come from within the freight and logistics world. It's something in the economy out there that kind of puts pressure on the fundamentals.
Right. And it's one of those things where I think even natural events can be a big factor. So looking at a little shout out to old
you know who that is, right?
No.
Huh? You don't know who that is?
Maybe I do.
Michael Vincent. Hey, the dude is out there listening.
The dude himself, Michael Vincent, we miss you. I miss you. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with, of course, natural events that might happen. So, of course, no one wants to see a destructive hurricane event or anything like that. But with those kinds of events that happen every year during hurricane season, or unfortunately tornadoes is the cleanup. And those are one of the instances that kind of spur activity, not long lasting. But I think a big one will be something that would have to kind of spur manufacturing. I'm not sure if that will be geopolitical. I don't know if it will be a sudden demand for some type of manufactured good, but I think manufacturing has a long way to go. Not a long way to go, but some room to grow and expand in order to really kind of pick up overall activity. Because the last couple of really quarters, we've seen a really depressed manufacturing segment. So we're looking at the ISM PMI, it's been struggling. We're looking at durable good orders. When you're looking at non-defense capital goods new orders, when you're looking at backlog of orders, a lot of manufacturers, I think, are going through their backlog of orders and now making room for new orders to come in. But if the new orders aren't coming in, now we're starting to see a pretty significant lack of activity coming from upstream. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to have to be factored into what could help spur the overall freight environment right now as well.
What do you think on reshoring? Have you been following the whole story and trend and cachet of reshoring and how that might affect the freight markets going forward?
Yeah, I think I think it would be a positive for sure to kind of see what kind of course, I've been a big proponent of growth in Mexico. I think they're kind of primed for it. I think the not unfortunate, but the big thing that they're going to have to overcome is just the massive environment and infrastructure that is China. Like China has had an incredible amount of investment from the government. It's trickled into the ease of business for local economies, and then making it easy for foreign investors to drive dollars in there. So now we're looking at Mexico. That's going to be one to get kind of help spur reshoring or nearshoring. But when we're looking at domestically within the U.S., I think we're going to get into the issue of how pricey it will be for some of these for domestic production within the U.S., how pricey some of the real estate might be, the cost of labor. We're looking at, of course, certain states that are going to make it easy for that kind of production. California might be difficult with the minimum wage requirements. Now it kind of doesn't make as much sense for them to manufacture as much. Texas likes to make things a little bit easier for businesses, as we saw throughout the pandemic. Have a ton of land there. New Mexico can certainly use some of that. Go Aggies can use some of that economic growth. But I think some of those border cities, we're looking at, of course, Laredo. We're looking at some parts of southern Arizona, Nogales. When you're looking at some parts of southern New Mexico, those are, I think, going to be areas that are primed for potential reshoring. If they can get the adequate investment and make things easy for businesses. And of course, when you look at places like New Mexico, lower cost of real estate compared to some parts of Texas, some parts of Arizona, go Aggies. It's also going to be an area where I think it's going to be primed for that reshoring aspect. But it's all going to be, of course, has to make sense. Is Mexico going to be easier? It's going to be competing with Mexico now for prices, for, of course, labor as well. How expensive is it going to be to get labor out there? If you get someone that lives in, Richmond, Virginia, can you convince, a team of engineers and manufacturers to relocate to some of those areas for what price? And so it's definitely going to take some cash, going to take some capital. But I'm a big proponent of it. I'm excited for it to kind of shorten the production times to make things a little bit more easier for domestic production. But also we have to kind of lean into our core competencies as, a country. And really, that's going to be one of the things that really kind of drives, of course, what we see with this next election cycle. Are we going to lean into more of a global, and or we're going to kind of shrink back into, you know what, let's keep things a little bit closer into the domestic side as well. What kind of policies would come from that aspect, you know, of a shift in policy, a shift in the office? So what would come from that as well?
That's a great segue into Michael Vincent's question here that I just threw up on the screen. You know, what kind of cycle, or, you know, is globalization dead? Is it not? What about rare earth materials and it being creating strained relations, or not necessarily it creating strained relations, but relationships with trading partners, but that being strained just by the other trade factors and the follow-on effects into the rare earth?
Yeah, I think that's a big one, especially when looking at
China.
the China. Yeah. And of course, like, hey, you know what? We're gonna pile on tariffs, and then in turn, China is just gonna pass those costs on to the consumer. And when you're looking, I think some of those other trade partners, when looking at rare earth and, you know, copper being controlled by some of those other trade partners, there can be that balancing effect of, you know what, you play easy, you play hardball with us, we'll play hardball with you as well. So I think we're looking at some of those global partners that may control some of those rare earth and other types of raw materials. I think that will
Cobalt.
also be a factor. Cobalt, you know, looking at this large move into EV, and now we're starting to see, I think, a little bit more prevalence in hybrid being a little bit more popular and more acceptable for a lot of consumers right now. But I think Michael Vincent, of course, always going to bring up a great point, and that might be a bit more of a question for him. Oh, thank you for the correct pronunciation, Michael Vincent. China. But I think he brings up a great point of that control of those mining materials and how that impacts overall trade relationships and what can be tit for tat as we get onto that international level and tariffs start to come into play.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of tariffs, I think tariffs might be going up no matter who wins in November.
Sounds like it. And you know what, it's one of those things where we all pay the bill for that one, you know, typically. And there can be subsidies, but then when subsidies happen, you know, it's that spurs on a whole other aspect of, you know, potential, I won't say issues, but it gets real interesting when you start to see what government subsidies do with surpluses. And now
Say issues.
so for example, like I think one of the interesting areas of subsidized protections, of course, is going to be in the agriculture field. So we're looking at, of course, like maybe dairy farmers compared to, you know, there's protections, I believe, for dairy farmers compared to how much we can import from maybe Canada or something like that. And so now might have a surplus of, you know, cheese or dairy or egg goods, whatever the subsidy might be. And now we even might have waste because, you know what, these farmers are incentivized to reach a certain level. Now we're trying to shuttle, you know, the surplus of produce into another market, whatever it might be, because we have these, you know, types of protectionist type policies, which, you know, what benefits some, but then, you know, you start to look at the efficiencies of some of these things that also kind of play out. So I think looking at subsidies and protectionism in some instances, it can definitely cause some issues when looking at the independent market dynamics. And so, of course, that's going to vary industry by industry.
Right. Kind of kicking the can down the road and putting that problem on the backs of many, almost like an insurance policy to a certain extent.
Oh, the insurance is definitely going to be a tricky one for sure. And I think that's another one where services are still elevated. And you never want to see inflation in services because that's always, I think, a tricky one to kind of, inflation itself is tricky to kind of, let's say, once the inflation genie's out the bottle, it's hard to get it back in. Services is a tricky one, I think, to always try to contain because you're looking at supply and demand of a good that's, you know, something very tangible that you can really wrap your mind around. Then you start to get into services, that gets to be a lot more tricky. But then that also kind of gets into, of course, some of the aspects of hoarding labor, overhead, and then accepted prices that, you know, people will continue to pay as it slowly starts to creep up. But that's a tricky one. I think that we have to kind of see how that one plays out over the next few quarters here for sure.
Definitely does. I mean, like, it just all plays into the inflation game, back into it, right? And when you're
Yeah,
talking about tariffs or anything that the hikes prices artificially, it just rolls into inflation, and it keeps those interest rates high, and it kind of stagnates the economy a little bit.
right.
Definitely does. So we went over unemployment, interest rates. Um, you talked a little bit about housing starts, of course, because you can't do a show without talking about housing starts and lumber.
Talk about Got to talk about it. Got to fit it in there somewhere. I think,
You do.
of course, when you're looking at single family, they're in a different place than multifam. But yeah, it's definitely interesting. Of course, I'm a big proponent of looking at what's going on flatbed, of course, as always.
Yeah.
But I was curious on your guys' end, what you guys might be seeing right now around going into produce season. Of course, I'm thinking of like, uh, northern Florida's time to shine. In some parts, I'm curious around how rates have been around this time of the year. If we're seeing any kind of regional variances going into produce season.
Well, Casey had his charts up, outbound loads coming out of Florida, right?
Mm.
Earlier. Let's throw that chart up there again from the Fairlanes pricing index and engine. And we'll see what exactly is happening in Florida, which is a really good market to gauge seasonality. So what do
Sure.
we have here?
Yeah. If we're looking at May 2024 versus May 2023, may not be that impressive. The average line haul is still down a couple bucks. But, if we're looking at May compared to April, there's a huge jump here, which is pretty indicative of that seasonality. You got rate per mile down here in the bottom right. You got your average line haul chart there. Nice. I don't know. Do you call that a V-shaped recovery, Tony? You're the economist.
I think that's a nice U to a sharp upward turn right there.
Okay. But yeah, I mean, we still haven't passed the rate people were getting last year coming out of Florida in May. But it'll be interesting to see how things trend here. I mean, what happens to seasonality in Florida? Does it kind of die out after May? It does kind of seem like that's probably the hottest month of the year. Does it shift to other places, or I don't know? Should to learn
On the produce side?
Yeah.
Yeah, if we look at California in the West Coast is the supplies food to most of the country, right? I mean, it's the breadbasket or I think the Midwest, the breadbasket. I don't know. What do you call it? It's the produce of produce, running from the valley to all points in the U.S. But Florida is important, especially for the Southeast and some of their main stocks as well. And I completely lost my train of thought there with answering your question. I had something on my mind, and I don't see it. But the average line haul, right, versus pick date,
right.
It's interesting because it looks like it's coming back, hopefully, to some kind of. We just want seasonality again.
Yeah, this is kind of showing seasonality, right? We're kind of reaching that peak again that happens in May, and probably indicative of things cooling back down here as we get back to May 2025.
Yeah, it's just it's a good indicator for the freight markets right there. So getting back into that, and I'll be the first to admit I don't really know the produce season, so I'm kind of I don't want to throw any dates out there. I never really moved reefer loads. I know that the flat. Well, let's look at some flatbed rates. Vincent was talking about that, and I'm always interested in that because this is the height of flatbed season right here. You start when it starts warming up. The rates are starting to go up as well. And that's what I always associate peak season with is with flatbeds and not necessarily with dry vans, because in December the flatbed market's pretty and it means that you can enjoy the holidays
for sure.
So what flatbed is, what color is that? Yellow?
Yeah, we're looking at yellow here from a rate per mile perspective. Here we have it. Average line haul.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. Kind of seems to diverge from dry van. And then, I guess things are heating up.
Yeah, so like April is a good month. April, May, June are always good months because you're moving material to where you need to do your summer construction. And usually by August you have everything you need where it should be, and you kind of have a little bit of a seasonal downturn into the fall.
Cool.
Yeah, this is awesome. Yeah.
All right, go ahead, Tony.
I thought I just got to compliment you guys on this these charts here, especially what Farelanes is able to do, and how you can definitely, I think, we just have to pull in some of these data points, near real time to kind of show, all right, this is what I should be expecting for this lane and how to go about it. And dude, I love the breakout of flatbed, reefer, power only, sprinter, step deck. So it's not something that you usually typically see from breakouts. Usually you only just see dry van, reefer, flatbed. So seeing all these other breakouts is it adds a lot more clarity to the fuzzy market that is freight and logistics.
That's right, baby. All trucks are not the same, Tony. They're not. They don't cost all the same. And I think you're right. If we can start to sectorize the market, maybe they're right. I know we think we have too much capacity now. What I like to think about is how do we use that capacity most efficiently? Are there chances where we could be moving freight on another type of truck, but we're pigeonholing it into a flatbed? It could be a step deck. How do we get trucks on the road like more often running? Asset utilization, I think, is the name of the game. And if we really kind of start thinking about things by the type of equipment that they are, I think it's a good way to do it. Stop lumping stuff together.
Definitely is. And I think the buzzword of 2024 that crept in from 2023, Casey, I'm going to say it, AI, driving a lot of, I think, stock activity. NVIDIA, shout out to NVIDIA and all the other AMD and all the others that are kind of following into that AI boom right now. But I'm curious to see how AI truly impacts the freight tech world, because freight tech, we always hear about, this is going to be the game changer, or you go to any kind of conference and you start to see this TMS is like no other TMS that you've ever seen. We pull in so much AI and all the other buzzwords. So it's going to be, I think, to see when all the dust settles, we're going to be some of the true solutions that are going to be really found out to be meaningful to the overall market.
It is, we hear about AI all the time.
Yeah.
And it will. It's finding use cases and the best way to use it. We were all around during, certainly Casey was, during the blockchain revolution. Casey was the leader of the blockchain revolution in freight.
Bidda.
And everyone threw it out. I don't know how many companies I talked to that that they raised copious amounts of money just by saying blockchain back in the day, 2018, 2019, right? Not that there's anything wrong with blockchain whatsoever. But you see that in AI now too. It's just like, your salespeople especially, right? We don't know what else to say, so we'll just throw in AI, and you can raise money off of it. You can, generate a little bit of interest. But how I exactly use it, I don't know. I will say that I'm starting to use a program right now, and I will let you know how it goes, because you kind of have to invest some time into it and train the models, right, and be able to at least coach it, right? So it's going to be a fun experiment no matter what.
Only as good as the prompt engineer using it.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. If that's the goal of AI, right, to make humans more efficient, right, make corporations more efficient. That becomes the question. It was cool talking to Ben Kowalski a couple of weeks ago, Kevin.
Uh-huh.
Right, the larger the organization, the less likely it is that you can get everybody to adopt a new technology, and that kind of assumes that you've picked the right technology and been able to implement it within the organization, give the people the tools, assuming it's the right tool. How many of those people are going to dig in and do the work that they need to do to take advantage of that tool? And, as a percentage of the company, are more people able and willing to pick up a new technology and use it effectively than at a large organization? It's an interesting question to think about.
It is.
Definitely is.
Definitely is. So it'll be interesting to see how AI kind of goes.
Yes.
In.
I would love to hear less about how these Fortune 500 CEOs are, how many times they say AI in a quarterly earnings call because they have to, probably not even knowing anything about the technology themselves. Love to hear how Marcus, your cousin, could use AI to become a more efficient owner operator, keep his business running, keep him be more competitive in a market where it's hard. It's hard to be an owner op. It's hard to be a trucker. I'm sure he's got a great head on his shoulders being able to keep hauling over the last couple of years. And you brought up that point earlier. It's really interesting. What does the demographic of truckers look like today relative to a couple of years ago when a lot of people were, chasing dollar signs? Be cool. There's a guy like Dr. Mark Monera. I saw Dooner lost 15 pounds officially as of today. These truckers get healthier, they get smarter, they get their hands on some AI. I don't know. Maybe the market should watch out.
That's a good guess for the future, is to get Dr. Mark in here and talk to him. He's got a great story and a great product over at Offshift.
For sure.
And it definitely seems like the technology is leveling the playing field, not just for large operators or large players to, mom and pop operations, but also to owner operators. It seems like that technology is definitely leveling the playing field across the board. So I think that can only be a more positive thing to continue to make the market more competitive, to maybe position an owner operator to get a lane that they're competing with a larger player or something like that. So I think that can definitely be beneficial for the industry. Now maybe it doesn't help bleed off capacity, but it definitely helps make the lives easier for a lot of owner operators that know what to look for or know what's meaningful technology and data. Because I think from what I hear, the drivers themselves are probably tired of so many different apps that they have to download. So I think maybe one area of freight tech is consolidating a lot of that technology into one useful app. And I'm sure someone already has that, and there's pretty many one useful apps of truth. But I think that's definitely going to be an area to kind of break through for sure.
Yeah, how do you bake like the super awesome AI automation tech into SMS, into email, right, where these guys are operating? You're right. I think that is kind of the question we're dealing with today.
It definitely is. It definitely is. We'll see how how AI changes our life. You know, the dude says Anthony uses AI to select his shoes in the morning. You probably do.
Oh, I saw. Oh, also, I think I saw something around flatbed and step deck. So I think
Yeah.
typical cargo flatbed trailers is going to be um, construction materials, heavy machinery. I think we look at step deck, it's going to be more so around taller cargo. I think when you're looking at low boy trailers, it's going to be more so like the extremely heavy and tall equipment. So I think maybe there is, I think he's spot on that there's some type of insights to be gleaned from the different types of flatbed trailers for sure. But I don't know how Vincent knows that I go to my open AI every morning to figure out how to tie my shoes, but it's like every day's a new day. I wake up and I forget because I don't have to remember. So I got my chat GPT just ready for me to, get those laces right.
Yeah, it's a good question on the flatbed versus you're looking at low boys and step decks. Maybe the more specialized trailer, the heavy, not heavy, but the more commercial, large construction projects, right? Industrial manufacturing versus residential manufacturing, maybe. Although that's not really apples to apples. But if you're seeing a lot of step decks and low boys, then I envision more oil field equipment going around, more factories being built, more just large industrial type of projects.
Also, probably a good tip for owner operators on being able to differentiate themselves by getting some type of specialization
Yes.
in order to make
Oh,
themselves a lot
yes.
more valuable. Because now there's a sea of owner operators. What can you do to kind of differentiate yourself? What license, what specialty, hazmat, whatever it might be, oversized.
Yep,
Goes a long
definitely.
way.
I mean, that's the number one rule of driving and anything else is differentiation. And the more specialized your freight is, the more you can charge.
Right.
Less competition out there. But well, Anthony, thanks for stopping by the show today. It's always great seeing you. We need to have you on constantly to go over economics each month. Give us a nice gauge in the market. But no, it's just always fun being on a show with you.
Exactly. I'm getting flashbacks. Kevin, Casey, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm honored. Thanks so much for having me as a guest. I hope is able to provide some macroeconomic overview, and then forward or upcoming episodes, maybe we can dive into certain trends a little bit more deeper, whether it be manufacturing, retail, consumer trends, regional analysis. I'm looking forward to it. But thanks so much for having me on today. It's been fun.
Perfect. Thanks. Casey?
Yeah, Tony, it's always a pleasure. I love chatting with you whenever I get the opportunity to. Miss you, bro. Hope to see you soon. I know we'll have you back on here shortly. And man, it's always a pleasure to catch up with old friends and talk freight.
Definitely. Everyone, thanks so much for tuning in as well to come see the three of us talk. Appreciate that.
Thank you again, and thanks everyone again to tuning in to this week. And dude, what's the bid? We'll be back next week talking about freight and the markets, maybe a little bit economy, and who knows what. But until then, take care and make this.
Well, maybe we won't be back next week, Kevin.
Oh yeah, it's July 4th next week, isn't it?
USA.
We might be back during the week. Maybe not. Who knows? We'll be back when we get back, though.
End of that.
All right, cool. Well, that's a wrap.
All right, everybody. Peace.